So yesterday we were reading it across an article, and I sort of agree with it. That the fact that there's all this Tory sleaze literally pouring down out of Westminster on a daily basis, crony contracts, obvious lobbying going on, which should not be going on, committed by David Cameron, and we are now in a state where we are having internal fights in the Labour Party of Starmer's side talking about electability, but ignoring a lot of the grassroots that are out there saying, hey, you're ignoring us. You're ignoring what the Labour Party is, that it's a leftist party. And as we've said this multiple times before when we talk about this, you can't out-Tory a Tory. Now, you've only got to look back to Tony Blair. And you can say whatever you want about Tony Blair, but Tony Blair, really, in 1997, he was very, very much a left-centrist guy. I mean, remember, it was New Labour who brought in the minimum wage. You know, there are, and I'm pretty sure if I went through, there are other lefty things that he did. But you've got to remember a lot of through the Corbyn years, there were some very, very good policies that people wanted. Sort of renationalising the railways, because the privatisation of them has proven to be an absolute joke and a farce and is just not working. The one that I've said before about having a nationalising broadband, because as we have seen throughout the pandemic, it has become vital for people to be able to connect, to talk, to work, and I've said the whole thing about education as well. That's how it should be sold, as an education benefit, because if we talk about how having public libraries is a wonderful thing for education for the public, then should not the public have access to the biggest learning tool there is, and that's the internet? And I think when you turn it on its head and you sell it like that, I think that becomes a lot more palpable than the way that Labour was selling it at the election. And of course, there are others. We can go through, obviously, increasing the minimum wage as well. But anyway, we're going to get on to a interesting talk here, because I do agree that Labour has to think beyond Hartlepool, beyond what could potentially happen, because as we've seen in the polls recently, they're not looking good for Labour. So, like I say, this comes from The Guardian, and please do remember to hit that like and share button before as well. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link as well called Buy Me a Coffee. So, like I say, this comes from The Guardian. The title is, "In Hartlepool and Beyond, Labour Must Reconnect with its Working Class Voters to Win." And I 100% agree with that. It actually absolutely has to. So, just as a slew of the elections in May come into view, including a Westminster by-election in Hartlepool, arguably a key red wall seat, Peter Mandelson has reappeared on the political scene, as he is wont to do from time to time. Indeed, he knows Hartlepool very well, since he was the town's MP for well over 12 years. Mandelson is correct to say that the test of Labour following the 2019 general election defeat is whether it can now be electable. But the country has changed in the quarter of a century since the party's 1997 landslide, reverting back to the old formula, in part created by Mandelson and based on an outdated political offer that won't work. This argument about electability is a cover for a profound ideological attempt to change Labour irreversibly. Mandelson recently said of New Labour that the conclusion that we reached was that there were elements of Thatcher's settlement that were irreversible. Of course, New Labour did much to reform the country during its years in power, and it's hard to forget how Labour struggled against the Tories to introduce minimum wage. It opened 3,632 Sure Start centres. The list of its progressive reforms would be quite long, but there will be other against less progressive list, namely the Iraq War being the most big one on it. Tony Blair did not shift the overall character of Thatcherism, nor did he want to. In 2015, the former Labour leader said that should a left government be elected, it would not have his support. New Labour simply isn't questioning the electability of Labour led by the left. Their real objective is that they don't want a left-led party at all, and therefore we must view the claims that Labour can never win from the left with deep suspicion. Those who would like to see a return to New Labour face their own set of questions. They must first explain why between 1997 and 2010 we lost almost 5 million voters. These were often concentrated in working class communities that were once Labour heartlands. This legacy lingers on. In the recent polls, the Tories are up 25% points ahead in Labour in working class communities, and among Leave voters we are nearly 60% points behind. This obviously has implications in seats like Hartlepool, where the early polling has not been encouraging. The 2017 election posits that the clearest challenge to the narrative that a radical Labour can't win these voters' allegiances. Blairites wrongly asserted that 2017, of course, was a Brexit election. I prepared a strategy paper for Jeremy Corbyn's team in February of 2017. It proposed a route to an election result of more than 40% of the votes, built upon a transformative campaign that would deny Theresa May her majority and perhaps even lead to a Labour majority. This strategy was based on a building of a wide-range electoral coalition that brought together people from all areas of society who desired change. In the event, we increased our polling, which had been in the mid-20s, going on to attract 40% of voters in the 2017 election. Of course, we didn't win, but we boosted our vote share by 9.6%. That's 3.4 million votes. This is the largest increase between two elections by any Labour leader since the war. In fact, Corbyn achieved nearly 5 million more votes than Gordon Brown. So what are we to make of the claim that 2017 was really a Brexit election, and that the party was boosted by a Remainer influx of support? It's a good effort to try and rewrite history and to avoid recognising the role of a transformative manifesto and a radical leader played into Labour's success. But it's incorrect. In fact, the party leaned even further towards Remain in 2019, but it lost its votes. Of their time in charge, Mandelson rather wistfully remarks that we hadn't put down the roots, I'm afraid, to change the culture of the party. But it was worse than that. They had depolarised politics. The British Social Attitudes in 2010 to 2012 report showed that voters were increasingly struggling to distinguish between New Labour and the Tories, the exact problem Keir Starmer is now having. Elections are always won from the centre ground, but the centre is nowhere near where New Labour would like it to be. Take those Labour voters who supported the Tories in 2019. Of those, 81% thought big businesses take advantage of ordinary people, while 84% of those said there is one law for the rich and one for the poor. It's hardly an argument for an uncritically pro-business leadership. And as we recently saw, the poll of Hartlepool voters who were massively in favour of state interventionism to create a national broadband network. In 2019, when Labour proposed this very idea, it was described as some form of communism. The reassertion of a familiar New Labour narrative is not to be feared, sneered, or even cheered. and there should be no need to resort to distorting the facts of our recent history. Let's have a true debate about electability. The 2017 election showed that the left can attract votes. It is right too to examine what happened afterwards and in the 2019 election. By-elections can be an imperial moment in political life. Looking back, both Miliband and Corbyn won their first by-elections, substantially increasing the share of the vote for Labour by 10% and 7% respectively. Labour too can win its first Starmer by-election. But whatever happens in Hartlepool in May, it's time to be blunt. We cannot win without rebuilding our relationship with working class voters in all their complexity and diversity. Never again should we take such voters for granted. As I have argued before, this is the key to any future election victory for Labour. So, I completely 100% agree. There is an absolute place on the left for left policies. And as we've seen there, people really do vote and really do want left policies. But no one at the moment's really giving them. And as was said there, in 2017, Labour won the biggest increase in votes it has ever seen since the Iraq War. So there is a very, very clear argument for having some very, very strong and good left policies. So Starmer has to know, has to recognise, and I hope that they do. And like I say, obviously the guy who wrote this was a former Labour MP. So, they know it. A lot of people in the party know it as well, that they can't just ditch the whole, Labour is a left party. And as I've said it before many, many times, the only way the left gets into power is through Labour, especially in our current system. So, as I've said before, the whole reason I joined the Labour Party was because I want them to adopt good leftist policies and even to move more left, because this will actually help differentiate them from from the Tories. Even only if we just manage to move them to like a centre-left party, I will consider that to be quite a victory, because once you are there, you can then start to move the needle even more. So, as we say sometimes, baby steps, always good steps to take. And I've often said it before, it is far, far better to affect change when you've got 1 foot in the door than 2 feet outside it. So, we need to take this to heart and we need to fight. Because definitely the Hartlepool by-elections, as I've said before, is going to be incredibly important. But the early polls from there do not look good. What we do from there, we really don't know. But we need to get in and do some sort of good form of change. And it does come down, I think, to the policies that Labour are going to put forward. So I do think that when Starmer said that the 2017 manifesto for Labour was a good starting point, I do believe him. Because, as we've just said there, the 2017 manifesto attracted a bigger vote share than any recent Labour vote. So, like I say, we'll have to see. But this is really Starmer's first big challenge. He's had a year in leadership. Arguably, it's been somewhat rocky, somewhat turbulent, and a lot of people like myself are annoyed that he hasn't done anything or seemed to do nothing, but he has lots of ammunition, certainly, and it's not like other people in the Labour Party have been, doing nothing, They've been out there, working their butts off tirelessly on, grassroots stuff. Dan Jarvis is the South Yorkshire Sheffield City region mayor and has been doing fantastic work in that, in the Sheffield City region. So it is possible to do. We just have to keep on pushing and keep on fighting. Just because you lose one battle does not mean you've lost the war. So, As always, thank you for watching. Please do remember to hit those like and share buttons on your way out. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And thank you to all those people for watching, and we'll see you all next time.